In addition to while loops, Java gives us a second way to write loops, for loops. While loops and for loops are equivalent, but sometimes for loops are easier to read than while loops. When we write a while loop, we set up the initial conditions of the loop, we specify the condition under which the while should keep going, and then inside the loop we do whatever we need to do, and then set up the next pass through the loop. For example, here is a loop that prints out the positive odd numbers less than 20.
She means the numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, and so on, up to 19.
See how each of the pieces match up? We start by creating a variable that's going to hold the number that we're working on. Our loop checks to make sure that the number is less than 20. The stuff that we do is print out the number. And to get ready for the next time through the loop, we add 2 to the number so that it becomes the next odd number. We have been using while loops, but there is an alternative Java statement called for loops that also repeat a block of code. In fact, while loops and for loops express exactly the same types of solutions. They're just a different way of writing them. A for loop starts with the keyword for, which is followed by parentheses containing all of the information about how the loop is controlled, how it gets set up, the condition that lets it keep running, and how we set up for the next pass through the loop. The body of the loop then just contains whatever work the loop is doing. So this is our while loop for printing out the odd numbers less than 20. Let's watch how it gets converted to a for loop. First, we move the initial setup of the loop, then we move the repeat condition, and then we move how we set up the next pass, and that just leaves the stuff that needs to get done in the loop. It turns out that for loops are much easier to read when we are writing code that walks through an array. Compare these two equivalent loops that print out the contents of an array named X. The for loop is more concise, so we tend to pick this structure when we are touching every position of an array. In fact, we use this so often, we call it a walking through the array type of loop. It always starts the counter at 0, keeps going while the counter is less than the number of positions in the array, and increments that counter between each pass through the loop's body.
Hey Merlin, you need to tell them I++ is just another way of writing I gets the value I plus 1. It's another way of incrementing I.
As another example, here is the while loop that we used to calculate the sum of all of the values in our ages array in the last video. Converted to the standard walking through the array type of loop, our code is much more concise and easier to read. After a while, you will get so used to seeing walking through the array types of loops that you will immediately recognize them and know that the loop will do the same thing to every position in the array. In this video, we learned a new way to write loops, for loops. For loops are really just a rearrangement of while loops. They express the same kinds of solutions.
Why do we have to learn 2 different ways to do the same thing? Isn't that just making things more complicated?
We'll learn more about how you pick which kind of loop to use when we get to writing code. There are specific situations where each is easier to read, and readability is an important part of writing good code. However, for now, you just need to know how they work. For loops are usually the loop structure of choice when we are doing something to every position of an array. In fact, we do this so often, we call a loop that looks like this a walking through the array type of loop.